To avoid a forced wedding, a young waitress forcefully kissed her guest, unaware that he was a hidden millionaire. The small coastal town of Fairhaven basked in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, its streets lined with quaint shops and colorful houses, each carrying the weight of generations-old traditions. The ocean breeze whispered through the narrow alleys, mingling with the scent of salt and the distant sound of seagulls. In the heart of this peaceful town stood the Seaside Diner, a cozy little restaurant with checkered tablecloths, faded menus, and windows that framed the endless horizon of the sea. Inside, the murmur of conversations blended with the clinking of cutlery and the occasional hiss of the coffee machine. Linda, a young waitress with auburn hair tied into a messy bun, weaved through the tables with practiced ease. Her green eyes, usually bright with curiosity, were dulled today by an exhaustion that ran deeper than mere physical fatigue. She forced a polite smile as she refilled coffee cups and scribbled down orders, but her heart wasn't in it. Her phone vibrated in the pocket of her apron. She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was watching, then quickly pulled it out. The screen lit up with a message from her mother. "Brian is a good man. Don't embarrass the family. Tonight you'll say yes at the engagement party." Linda's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the phone until her knuckles turned white. She could almost hear her mother's stern voice in her head, echoing the expectations that had suffocated her for years. She swallowed hard, blinking back the frustration that threatened to spill over. Her chest felt heavy, like a storm was brewing inside, ready to break free. She shoved the phone back into her pocket and forced herself to focus. But the words lingered in her mind, clinging to her like a shadow. Brian. The very thought of his smug grin and arrogant demeanor made her skin crawl. She didn't love him. She never had. But in Fairhaven, love was often a luxury, and expectations weighed heavier than the heart's desires. As she moved toward the next table, her eyes were drawn to a man sitting alone in the far corner of the diner. He was a stranger, clearly not from around here. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and he wore a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, blending in with the casual crowd. Yet there was something about him, something in the way he sat back in his chair, observing the world with a quiet confidence. His eyes, a deep shade of blue, followed her movements, not in a predatory way like Brian's, but with a kind of thoughtful curiosity. Linda quickly looked away, her heart unexpectedly skipping a beat. Probably just another tourist, she thought, shaking off the feeling. Just as she was about to approach his table, the bell above the diner door jingled loudly, and the familiar, unwelcome sound of Brian's laughter filled the room. Linda's stomach twisted into a knot. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Brian always made sure people noticed him when he entered a room. Well, look who it is," Brian's voice rang out, dripping with mockery. He strolled into the diner, flanked by two of his equally arrogant friends, their expensive clothes and overconfident smirks starkly out of place in the humble eatery. Linda stiffened. She could feel their eyes on her, and the weight of the entire diner's attention shifted with them. She turned slowly, forcing a neutral expression onto her face. "Linda," Brian drawled, sauntering over to her with a cocky grin. "Don't forget, tonight you get to be the perfect little fiancée. Hope you've got that pretty smile ready for the big announcement." The words were like nails on a chalkboard. Linda clenched her jaw, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the curious stares of the other diners, the whispers starting to ripple through the room. Brian leaned in closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Don't even think about backing out. You know your family needs this. You need this. Unless you prefer waiting tables for the rest of your life." Linda's vision blurred with fury and helplessness. Her mind raced, desperate for an escape. The walls felt like they were closing in, the suffocating expectations pressing down harder than ever before. And then, as if guided by instinct, her eyes darted to the corner of the diner, to the stranger who had been quietly watching everything unfold. Without giving herself a moment to reconsider, Linda strode across the room, her heart pounding in her ears. She reached the stranger's table, barely registering the surprise flickering in his blue eyes. Before he could say a word, she leaned down, cupped his face in her trembling hands, and kissed him. The diner fell into stunned silence. Linda could feel the weight of every gaze, the shock radiating from the patrons, but she didn't care. For a brief, breathless moment, the world outside that kiss disappeared. The stranger's lips were warm and soft against hers, and for a heartbeat, it felt real, too real. When she finally pulled back, her cheeks flushed, and she dared to meet his eyes. They were filled with something unexpected, not confusion or anger, but amusement and perhaps curiosity. She straightened up, trying to catch her breath. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just needed to," she trailed off, realizing how ridiculous it all sounded. The stranger chuckled softly, his voice smooth and warm. "No apology necessary," he said, a playful glint in his eye. "But if you needed an escape, you could have just asked." Linda blinked, taken aback by his easygoing response. Before she could say anything else, Brian's voice erupted from behind her, laced with fury. "What the hell, Linda? Who the hell is this?" Linda turned slowly, squaring her shoulders, a newfound defiance surging through her. "This is my boyfriend," she declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. The lie tasted strange on her tongue, but it felt empowering. "And I won't be attending any engagement party tonight." Brian's face turned an ugly shade of red, his jaw clenched tight. His friends snickered nervously behind him, unsure whether to intervene. "You'll regret this," Brian hissed, his voice low and venomous. "Your family will regret this." But Linda stood her ground, her heart racing with a mix of fear and exhilaration. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, but for the first time in a long while, she felt free. As Brian stormed out of the diner, the tension in the room slowly dissolved into murmurs and stolen glances. Linda turned back to the stranger, her face still flushed with adrenaline. "Thank you," she breathed, unsure of what else to say. He smiled, a slow, knowing grin. "The name's William," he said, extending his hand. "And you're welcome. But now I'm curious, what's the story behind that kiss?" Linda let out a breathless laugh, realizing her life had just taken a turn she never could have predicted. The diner buzzed with a stunned silence long after Brian stormed out, his anger leaving a thick tension in the air. Conversations had paused, forks hovered mid-air, and curious glances flickered between Linda and the stranger she had just kissed. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drumbeat, and the flush in her cheeks felt like it would never fade. She straightened slowly, her eyes flickering to William, whose calm, amused expression was in stark contrast to her frantic thoughts. His deep blue eyes sparkled with intrigue, and the faintest hint of a smile played on his lips. "I'm so sorry," Linda blurted, her voice barely above a whisper. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, avoiding his gaze. I needed to get out of a really uncomfortable situation." William chuckled softly, the sound low and warm. "I could tell," he said, leaning back in his chair with an easy grace. "But I have to admit, that's the most interesting way someone's introduced themselves to me." Linda couldn't help but let out a nervous laugh, her tension easing just a little. She glanced around the diner, noticing how people were still sneaking looks their way. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "This is so embarrassing," she muttered. "I didn't mean to drag you into my mess." William tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly, but still with that relaxed demeanor. "If you need a hand getting out of more awkward situations, I'd be happy to help." Linda blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "You'd help me?" He shrugged nonchalantly. "Why not? You've already made me the talk of the town with that kiss. Might as well commit to the role." His grin widened. "I'll be your pretend boyfriend? If that's what you need." Linda stared at him, stunned. She didn't even know this man. He was a stranger, someone who just happened to be sitting in the diner at the wrong, or maybe right time. But there was something in his voice, something in his calm confidence, that made her believe he was serious. She hesitated, biting her lip. Could she really pull this off? It sounded crazy, but the alternative, facing Brian and her family alone, felt even worse. "Well," she started, her voice tentative. "There's an engagement party tonight. My mother expects me to say yes to Brian's proposal. If you're serious about pretending to be my boyfriend, I could use the help. Just for tonight." William's eyes sparkled with something unreadable, but his smile remained. "Consider it a date." By the time evening rolled around, Linda was questioning every life choice she'd made that led her to this moment. She stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, smoothing down the simple navy blue dress she'd pulled from the back of her closet. It wasn't fancy, but it was the nicest thing she owned. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her necklace. There was a knock at the door. Linda's heart leapt into her throat. She hurried to open it, and there stood William. Gone was the casually dressed stranger from the diner. In his place was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. He wore a crisp, tailored suit that fit him perfectly, his dark hair neatly styled, and his confident smile intact. For a moment, Linda forgot how to breathe. "Wow," she whispered before she could stop herself. William chuckled, his eyes sweeping over her with genuine admiration. "You're not so bad yourself," he said, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The engagement party was held at the Fairhaven Country Club, the most extravagant venue in town. The grand hall was filled with crystal chandeliers, elegant floral arrangements, and the hum of forced laughter. Linda could feel every pair of eyes on her the moment she and William stepped through the doors. She took a deep breath, clinging to William's arm like a lifeline. His presence beside her was steady, grounding. He leaned down slightly, his breath warm against her ear. "Relax," he murmured. "We've got this." Linda nodded, swallowing her nerves. It didn't take long for Brian to spot them. He was holding court near the bar, surrounded by his usual entourage. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw William at Linda's side, and his smirk twisted into something darker. Well, Brian sneered as they approached. Look who couldn't stay away. His gaze flickered to William, and his lips curled in disdain. "And who's this? Your new charity case?" Linda's jaw clenched, but before she could respond, William stepped forward, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. "Actually," William said smoothly, his voice calm but with an unmistakable edge, "I'm Linda's boyfriend, and I'm here to make sure she's treated with the respect she deserves." The room seemed to freeze for a moment. Linda's heart swelled with gratitude and something else, something unexpected, as William spoke. Brian scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "We'll see how long that lasts," he muttered, turning on his heel and stalking away. As the evening wore on, Linda found herself increasingly grateful for William's presence. He navigated the crowd with ease, deflecting nosy questions from her relatives and standing up to snide remarks from Brian's friends. Every time someone tried to corner her about the engagement, William would step in with a charming smile and a quick-witted comment that left them speechless. But it wasn't just the way he protected her that surprised Linda, it was how easy it felt to be around him. Between the forced conversations and fake smiles, they found moments of genuine connection. William would whisper jokes in her ear, making her laugh when she thought she couldn't possibly relax. And every time their eyes met across the room, it felt like they shared a secret only the two of them knew. At one point, they stepped out onto the balcony to escape the stifling atmosphere inside. The cool night air was a welcome relief. Linda leaned against the railing, staring out at the moonlit ocean. "Thank you," she whispered, turning to William. "I don't know how I would have gotten through tonight without you." William's eyes softened. "You're stronger than you think, Linda, but I'm glad I could help." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the tension between them shifting into something deeper, something neither of them fully understood yet. Linda smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "I know this was supposed to be fake, but it feels kind of real." William chuckled, his gaze never leaving hers. "Maybe that's because some things don't need pretending." Linda's heart fluttered in a way that had nothing to do with the charade they'd started. She didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. In the days following the engagement party, the lines between pretense and reality began to blur. What had started as a spur-of-the-moment decision, a desperate attempt to escape an unwanted engagement, slowly evolved into something more complicated. Linda and William found themselves falling into a rhythm, one that felt far too natural for two people supposedly faking a relationship. At first, their continued appearances together were strategic. Fairhaven was a small town, and news traveled fast. It wasn't enough to show up at one party together. They needed to convince everyone, Linda's family, Brian, and the town's ever-watchful eyes, that their relationship was real. So they met for coffee at the local cafe, strolled along the boardwalk on lazy afternoons, and even attended another family gathering where William once again charmed everyone with his wit and easy demeanor. But somewhere along the way, Linda stopped thinking of it as an act. One afternoon, they found themselves at the town's old lighthouse, a quiet spot that overlooked the endless stretch of the ocean. The salty breeze tousled Linda's hair as she sat on a weathered bench, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. William sat beside her, his gaze distant, as if lost in thoughts he wasn't ready to share. "I used to come here when I was younger," Linda said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "It was my escape from everything." She smiled wistfully. "I'd sit here for hours, dreaming about leaving Fairhaven and opening my own little cafe in some big city." William turned to her, his expression gentle. "What stopped you?" Linda sighed, staring out at the horizon. My family. They think dreams like that are foolish. They wanted me to stay here, settle down, marry someone like Brian. She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. I guess they got half of that right. William was quiet for a moment before he spoke. You shouldn't let anyone decide your life for you, Linda. You deserve to chase your dreams. His words were simple, but they stirred something deep inside her. No one had ever said that to her before, not with that kind of sincerity. She glanced at him, her heart skipping a beat at the earnestness in his eyes. What about you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What brought you to Fairhaven? William hesitated, the easy smile faltering just for a second. I needed a break, he said finally. A fresh start, maybe. I spent a long time chasing things that didn't really matter, and when I finally got them, I realized I wasn't happy. Linda studied him, sensing there was more to his story, but she didn't press. She understood the need to keep certain things close to the heart. Days turned into weeks, and their time together became less about appearances and more about genuine connection. They spent lazy mornings wandering through the farmer's market, sharing pastries, and laughing over inside jokes that seemed to multiply with each passing day. They'd cook simple dinners at Linda's apartment, music playing softly in the background as they danced around the kitchen, bumping into each other and pretending it was accidental. But it was in the quiet moments, those rare pockets of stillness, when Linda felt the pull the strongest. Like when William would brush a stray curl from her face, his fingers lingering just a moment too long, or when their eyes met across a crowded room, and the world seemed to fade around them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, they sat on Linda's tiny balcony, sipping wine from mismatched glasses. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, the kind that sat heavy on the tongue but never quite found their way out. I never thought pretending could feel this real, Linda whispered, her eyes fixed on the horizon. William's gaze was steady on her, his voice low. Maybe it's because it isn't pretending anymore. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment she wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that William was here for her, not because of some agreement, but because he wanted to be. But a part of her, the part that had been hurt and disappointed too many times, held back. As their feelings grew deeper, so did the weight of their secrets. William found himself standing on the precipice of a truth he couldn't ignore. Every day spent with Linda made it harder to keep his real identity hidden. He wasn't just a man passing through Fairhaven, looking for a fresh start. He was a millionaire, a man who had inherited a fortune but found little joy in the trappings of wealth. His life had been filled with people who wanted him for his money, his status, but Linda was different. She saw him, or at least, the version of him he allowed her to see. But what would happen if she knew the truth? Late one night, as William lay awake in his rented apartment, staring at the ceiling, the weight of his secret pressed down on him. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to lay it all bare and hope that what they had would survive. But fear held him back. Fear that the moment she found out, everything between them would crumble. Meanwhile, Linda grappled with her own turmoil. The more time she spent with William, the more difficult it became to remind herself that this was supposed to be fake. She had agreed to this arrangement because it was safe, a way to escape Brian without risking her heart. But William wasn't safe. He was kind and thoughtful, with a smile that disarmed her and eyes that saw right through her walls. She found herself looking forward to their time together, replaying his words in her head long after they'd parted. And when he wasn't around, she felt his absence like a physical ache. But what scared her the most was the realization that she was falling for him, for real. And if this was still just a game to him, she wasn't sure her heart could handle the fallout. The tension between them reached its breaking point one evening, as they walked along the boardwalk, the sound of waves crashing against the shore filling the silence between them. William, Linda said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned to face him. What are we doing? William looked at her, his expression unreadable. What do you mean? This, she gestured between them, her voice trembling. It started as a way to get Brian off my back, but it's not just that anymore. At least, not for me. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I need to know if this is real, or if I'm just fooling myself. William's heart twisted. This was the moment to tell her everything. To come clean and risk it all. But the words caught in his throat. He saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the hope she was barely daring to hold on to, and he was terrified of shattering it. Linda, he began, his voice rough in emotion. But before he could finish, his phone buzzed in his pocket, shattering the fragile moment. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. It was a message from his business partner, a reminder of the life he'd been running from, the life he hadn't told Linda about. Linda saw the change in his expression, the way his eyes darkened, and her heart sank. "You're hiding something," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a punch to the gut. "Aren't you?" William opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Linda shook her head, stepping back. "I can't do this, William. Not if you're not being honest with me." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving William standing alone on the boardwalk, the weight of his unspoken truth hanging in the salty air. The days after Linda walked away from William felt heavier than any she had known. She threw herself into work at the diner, focusing on the rhythmic tasks of taking orders, pouring coffee, and wiping down tables. But no matter how much she tried to distract herself, his face haunted her. The way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the warmth in his voice when he whispered her name. She wanted to believe what they had was real, but the silence between them grew louder with each passing day. "If it had been real, he would have told me the truth," she reasoned, trying to convince herself that walking away had been the right choice. But her heart refused to listen. Meanwhile, William found himself standing at the edge of a truth he could no longer avoid. He'd spent countless nights staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over Linda's number, only to lock the screen and toss the device aside. Every time he tried to find the right words, fear held him back. Not fear of losing her, he already felt like he had, but fear of confirming her worst suspicions about him. He had fallen for Linda, truly and deeply, but how could he make her believe that when the foundation of their relationship had been built on a lie? The town's annual Founders Gala arrived, a lavish event hosted at the Fairhaven Country Club, where the entire town gathered to celebrate its heritage. Linda hadn't planned on attending, but her mother's insistent calls and passive-aggressive remarks about making things right wore her down. "You need to stop sulking, Linda," her mother had snapped over the phone. "Brian's going to be there, and you can still fix this mess. Everyone's talking about you and that stranger. Don't embarrass us further." Linda gritted her teeth but agreed to go. Not for Brian, not for her mother, but because a part of her wanted to see William one last time. She needed closure, needed to hear him explain, even if she wasn't sure she wanted to believe him. The gala was as extravagant as ever. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting soft light over the sea of well-dressed guests. The air buzzed with polite laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. Linda stepped into the grand hall, her heart pounding in her chest. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pinned up, but nothing could steady the storm swirling inside her. She didn't have to look far to find Brian. He was standing near the bar, a smug smile plastered on his face as he chatted with a group of men in expensive suits. When his eyes landed on Linda, that smugness deepened into something more sinister. And then she saw William. He was across the room, standing near one of the tall windows, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored suit that clung to him like it had been made just for him. His eyes met hers, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, the room seemed to fade away. But before Linda could decide whether to approach him, Brian's voice cut through the air like a blade. Well, look who finally showed up," Brian sneered, his voice loud enough to draw attention from the nearby guests. He sauntered toward Linda, his drink sloshing slightly in his glass. "Tell me, Linda, did you come to see me or your little secret millionaire over there?" Linda froze, her blood running cold. "Secret millionaire?" The words echoed in her mind, but before she could respond, Brian continued, his voice dripping with malicious delight. "Oh, you didn't know?" He chuckled darkly, turning to the crowd that was now gathering, eager for the unfolding drama. "Let me enlighten you all. Your charming boyfriend, William? He's not some down-on-his-luck guy passing through town. He's William Carter, the heir to Carter Enterprises, a millionaire who's been playing house with our sweet Linda here, pretending to be just another regular guy." The words hit Linda like a slap to the face. She felt the room tilt, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She turned to William, searching his face for any sign that this was some cruel misunderstanding. But the guilt in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. "Linda," William began, his voice strained, but she shook her head, stepping back as if his very presence burned her. "Don't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't you dare!" The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, but Linda didn't hear them. All she could hear was the pounding of her heart and the deafening roar of betrayal. Without another word, she turned on her heel and pushed through the crowd, her vision blurred by tears threatening to spill. William followed her out of the hall, his heart racing. He caught up to her in the parking lot, where she stood under the dim glow of the streetlights, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "Linda, please," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Let me explain." She whirled around, her eyes blazing with hurt and fury. "Explain," she spat, her voice rising. "Explain what, William?" "That you've been lying to me this whole time. That everything we shared was just some game to you." "It wasn't a game," William said desperately, stepping closer. "I didn't plan for this to happen. I didn't mean to lie, I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, you'd treat me differently." Linda let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow in the quiet night. "You're right, I would have treated you differently. I would have known not to fall for someone who thinks hiding the truth is the same as protecting someone." William's face crumpled. "I love you, Linda." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, Linda felt her resolve waver, but the pain was too fresh, too raw. "You don't even know what love is," she whispered, her voice cracking. "If you did, you wouldn't have lied to me." And with that, she turned away from him for the last time, leaving William standing alone in the cold night, his heart shattered. The days that followed were the longest of their lives. Linda buried herself in work, trying to numb the ache in her chest, but nothing could erase the memory of William's words, the look in his eyes when he said he loved her. She wanted to hate him, to believe he was just another rich man who thought he could buy his way into people's hearts. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. William, on the other hand, found himself lost in a world that suddenly felt emptier than ever before. The wealth he once thought defined him now felt like a curse. He wanted to reach out to Linda, to beg for her forgiveness, but he knew that words weren't enough. Not this time. They were both trapped in the same painful truth. Loving someone didn't always mean knowing how to hold on to them. The days dragged on like a slow, relentless tide, each one more suffocating than the last. Linda tried to bury herself in routine, waking up early, working double shifts at the diner, and collapsing into bed exhausted. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, William was always there, lingering in her thoughts like an echo she couldn't shake. At first she clung to her anger. It was easier to be mad at him than to admit how much she missed him. She replayed Brian's words in her head over and over, convincing herself that William had only been pretending. A millionaire playing at being ordinary. But the more she tried to believe that, the harder it became. Because when Linda closed her eyes at night, it wasn't William's money or his hidden identity that haunted her. It was the way he'd looked at her when he thought no one else was watching. It was the gentle brush of his fingers against her cheek, the way his laughter had filled the empty spaces in her heart, and the softness in his voice when he whispered her name like it meant something. She realized that, beneath all the lies, the moments they'd shared were real. He didn't lie about how he felt, she thought, her chest tightening. He was scared, just like me. Meanwhile, William had made his decision. After days of waiting, hoping Linda might reach out, he finally accepted that she wasn't going to. The pain of her absence was sharper than he'd ever expected, a constant ache that no amount of money or success could dull. Fairhaven had been his escape, a place to find meaning beyond his wealth. But instead he'd found her, and now, leaving felt like running from the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Before he left, William wrote Linda a letter. He poured everything he couldn't say out loud onto the page, each word heavy with regret and love. Along with the letter, he left a small envelope at the diner, addressed to her in his neat handwriting. Inside was enough money for Linda to finally open the cafe she'd always dreamed of, along with a note that read, "Even if you never forgive me, I want you to have the life you deserve. I believe in you, Linda. I always have." Then, with a heavy heart, he packed his bags and made his way to the train station, the town of Fairhaven slowly disappearing in his rearview mirror. Linda found the letter 2 days later. It had been left on the counter at the diner by the morning shift, who mentioned that the handsome stranger had dropped it off quietly and left without a word. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope, her heart pounding in her chest. She read William's words once, then twice, her eyes blurring with tears. When she reached the note about the cafe, her breath hitched. For a long time she just sat there, the letter clutched to her chest, as the truth finally settled in her heart. He wasn't trying to buy me, she realized. He just wanted me to be happy, even if he wasn't part of that happiness. That was when she knew. It didn't matter who William was or how much money he had. What mattered was the way he had seen her, not as a project, not as someone to save, but as someone to believe in. And she couldn't let him walk away without telling him that. The train station was nearly empty when Linda arrived, her heart racing as she scanned the platform. The distant sound of a train whistle echoed through the cool evening air, and panic clawed at her chest. What if I'm too late? She thought desperately. But then she saw him. William stood near the edge of the platform, his suitcase at his side, staring out at the tracks with a faraway look in his eyes. "William," she shouted, her voice cracking from emotion. He turned, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw her running toward him, tears streaming down her face. For a moment he just stood there, as if unsure whether she was real or just a cruel trick of his imagination. When Linda finally reached him, she was breathless, her chest heaving. She didn't give him a chance to speak before blurting out, "I don't want your money, William. I don't care about any of that." William's eyes softened, but he said nothing, waiting for her to finish. Linda took a shaky breath, her voice trembling. I want you. I want the man who made me believe in myself again. The one who made me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how. I don't care if you're rich or poor, William. I care about you." For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then William dropped his suitcase and closed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. Linda melted into his embrace, the warmth of him dissolving every ounce of pain and doubt she'd been holding on to. "I'm so sorry," William whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have told you the truth. I was just scared of losing you." Linda pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, her hands cupping his face. "You're never going to lose me again," she promised, her voice barely more than a whisper. And then their lips met, soft and sure, sealing a promise that no lie or misunderstanding could ever break. Months later, the little cafe that Linda had always dreamed of stood proudly on the corner of Fairhaven's main street. The Lighthouse Cafe, she named it, a nod to the place where she'd first shared her hopes with William. The warm, inviting space was filled with the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of gentle laughter, a haven for locals and tourists alike. Behind the counter, Linda moved with ease, her eyes sparkling with the kind of happiness that came from living the life she'd always wanted. And beside her, William was never far, whether he was fixing a wobbly table, trying his hand at baking and failing spectacularly, or simply sitting at a corner table, watching her with that same tender look in his eyes. Their love had been tested, stretched, and nearly broken, but it had survived. And in the cozy corners of their cafe, surrounded by the people they'd grown to call family, Linda and William found that sometimes the best stories weren't the ones you planned, but the ones that surprised you when you least expected it. And this time there was no pretending. And so, Linda and William's story reminds us that love isn't always perfect. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes born out of the most unexpected moments. But when it's real, it can weather any storm, break down walls, and heal even the deepest wounds. Their journey from a chance encounter to a love that defied expectations shows that sometimes the people who enter our lives unexpectedly are the ones meant to stay forever. And in the quiet corners of a seaside town, amidst laughter and coffee, they built a life not based on wealth or appearances, but on trust, honesty, and the simple beauty of being together. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs a little reminder that love can find us when we least expect it. And for more heartwarming tales that inspire, heal, and stir your soul, make sure to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change your day or your life. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep believing in the magic of love and second chances.